In this episode, I review the British New Wave classic The Entertainer from 1960. This was directed by Tony Richardson. It was based on the play by John Osborne, and John Osborne co wrote the screenplay as well with Nigel Kneale. And it starred Laurence Olivier, Brenda Banzie, Roger Livesey, Joan Plowright, Alan Bates, as well as Albert Finney. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast exploring storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, theater, among other areas of the arts. Today, of course, I am going to be reviewing The Entertainer, as I said off the top. The plot, according to IMDb, for those of you who have not seen it, is Archie Rice, who Laurence Olivier plays, is an old-time British music hall performer, sinking into final defeat. He schemes to stay in show business. This is a wonderful, powerful film. And I've seen it once before, or it's been a little while since I've seen it. I can't recall exactly when I first saw it, but I've been wanting to revisit it as as an actor myself and an acting teacher as well as a YouTube video podcaster. As you all know, I work in show business, and this is about show business. But it's very relatable because it's really about a man who is trying to stay in show business at all costs and does not want things to change, even though things are changing. The things in his life are not working anymore for him and his family. And what's so interesting about it is that it's even though it's about show business, it really was a metaphor for what was happening in England at that time. And this whole new wave was, what they called the British New Wave, and often explored films about angry young men. And they were all, not all of them, but a lot of them were originally plays, like this one was by John Osborne. And they called it the angry young men plays because they were anti-establishment. They were people who were ordinary, working class, and lived in poor conditions, and were angry that about their lives. And this was something that had not been seen in on the stage before. People who were talking openly about about England, about the injustices that they felt that they were experiencing in the class system in the UK, and things like this. So this was very, very new. And Olivier at the time asked John Osborne to write this play for him because he felt that the audiences were changing, the plays were changing, and if he didn't, join in with the way things were going, he was going to be out of touch, and he was not going to be able to continue in the theater as an actor. And so he very much was someone who was represented the norm, the establishment, the British theater. And so here he was asking for a play to be written for him, and which is quite remarkable. I mean, I think that was quite smart of him to do that. And of course, after this the play was a hit, and then after this he started the National Theatre, and that of course gave way to many the new generation that came after him, and that he continue to work with, and of course at the National Theatre. And so this is an extraordinary film also because it is a metaphor for the UK, Britain not no longer being as powerful or as strong as they once were. That this is long after the war, but it also takes place at a time, and it's in the film as well as the play, as this crisis in the Middle East, when the UK and other countries went into Egypt, and they invaded Egypt, and then they, due to political pressure, were talked out of Egypt, and it was embarrassing for them as early in the fighting that was happening. And so you see this in the film. The son of Archie is a soldier, and he's going off to war, and so they're very, very concerned about him. Something that Tony Richardson, the director, said here, I just wanted to read because it really sums up this film and the state of the country at that time in England. Of the character of Archie Rice, Richardson said he was the embodiment of a national mood. Archie was the future, the decline, the soreness, the ashes of old glory where Britain was heading. And Archie has all kinds of problems because, for one thing, he's facing bankruptcy, and just like England at the time, things weren't the same. Things for him are not the same. He's not a first-rate music hall performer, but he's a music hall performer in this seaside resort that was very popular at one point, but was really, the popularity was declining for real, which of course you see in the film. And so the audiences are fewer and fewer. And I like right off the top when you see people walking by all these, advertisements of his face and outside of the theater that he was working at, and people talk, oh, well, you don't see him on TV. I mean, that's what some of the characters were saying, which was something that else was happening at this time. I mean, television was becoming bigger, rock and roll, things like that, and so these music halls were people were losing interest in, and so here's a guy who this has been his whole life, and he's much older. His father was in show business. His father did the same thing. His father's now retired, and so he's trying to hold on at all costs, and he's facing bankruptcy. He's severely in debt, and I mean, there's a lot of humor in the film too, because he also owes a lot of the cast money. And so during the show, you see every time that they're backstage or off stage, they're like, hey, where's my money? And it's just like, the irony is that these people are trying to enjoy these people on stage, and they, you think that everyone's is showing you something that is supposed to be happy and fun and entertaining, and then you don't expect that behind the scenes they're all at each other's throat for their paychecks, which is has a dark sense of humor. But he's someone who's very charming, and he's always talking about the old times and giving stories about the old times in pubs, and he wears this mask, and he's avoiding his problems as much as he can. And something you saw in the British New Wave films is people living in small flats and small spaces, and so when he's at home with his wife and his father, that adds to the tension as well. These tight spaces that they live in, and his daughter is coming to visit, Jean Rice, played by Joan Plowright, and she's seeing how things are changing, and her fiance even wants to leave England, and he gets a job offer somewhere, and so she doesn't know what to do, because he's describing England now as being dead. And but she's torn because she loves her family, and this is where she's grown up, and she has a job in London, and so she doesn't know what to do. There's a couple of characters, her character and Alan Bates' character Frank, who are the son and daughter of Archie, who Laurence Olivier plays. Their characters were underdeveloped, I found. I mean, I love the story. I just found that there were some things about their characters that I think really were underdeveloped, which I'll get into a bit. I'll get into that shortly. But this is what she's seeing and experiencing, and she's very, very concerned. And Archie basically is trying to get another show up on its feet, and the one that he's already got on is not doing well, and so he's trying to raise funds from friends and people in the Winter Garden Theater, a big theater, to fund this new show of his, and everyone's saying no. Because they need something that's already reputable, that's something that's already working somewhere else that they can now make bigger. And he has nothing. I mean, he's just saying that he's got this show that's not good enough, even though this producer that he confronts early on in this pub is a good friend of his. So he's got all these problems. He's worried about his son who went off to war. He's facing bankruptcy. He's one step away from never being able to perform again, and so he gets this job doing announcing a beauty pageant. He's sort of like the host of this beauty pageant, and he meets this character Tina, played by Shirley Ann Field. And the one way to distract himself is he has a wave with women, and he drinks, and so he approaches Tina, even though he's married, and he basically woos her, and because she doesn't know what his problems are, and because he is publicly known, she thinks that what he's saying is true, and what he says is that he can put her in a show, and her parents have money and they're very wealthy, so he starts to think, okay, well, I'll be with her. I'll talk the parents into investing in a show with her, and we'll put her in it. So this is his plan. And then he begins to think of even marrying this woman, and even though he's married to Phoebe, who he lives with. And what's interesting is that when watching it again, I didn't even realize this woman Phoebe was his wife at first, because they don't relate to each other in any way like a husband and wife do. He's just joking around a lot with her, and at the beauty pageant, she goes to see him after the show, and he totally brushes her off, and he walks away with Tina. So he really has no regard for her, and it's quite sad. But I did not even know that was his wife, which was quite telling. And so he's a guy he'll do whatever he can to stay in show business. This is a showbiz guy, and he will not compromise. He cannot see what's happening, and so this is his scheme. This is what he's going to do: is put Tina in a show and carry on to the next one. And there's a great scene early on in the film where he sleeps with Tina. And afterwards, they're talking, and she's talking about how incredible he is, how magnificent. Sorry, I can't talk. How magnificent he is, and everything. And he, Olivier played this so beautifully, because he's sort of listening to her, and this does nothing. It makes him sad. That was my impression of how he was experiencing what she was saying. She's throwing all these compliments at him, and he's so sad, and he doesn't really seem to believe that, because I think even though he has been scheming and he's done, he's now cheated on his wife, the mother of his children is not Phoebe, is another woman who died not long after the Jean Rice was born, and that he was having an affair with Phoebe while his children Jean was born, not long after she was born. So now he's doing the same thing. Again, cheating on his wife, as just like he did the first time, and so he certainly is aware that he is not really a good guy. I'm not saying he doesn't have things about him that are sympathetic, because I certainly felt sympathy towards him, and he is portrayed in an empathetic way, but he is certainly full of flaws, which obviously it makes it more interesting. And he tells his daughter about the fact that he cheated on her mother with Phoebe, and about this marriage. And even with his children, he doesn't relate to them as children. I mean, this is just a guy who's had his head buried in his work, that he just doesn't make enough time for his children, which is why I felt the children were sort of underdeveloped, because they don't seem to have much of a problem with him or a grudge with him. Even Alan Bates, Frank Rice, who's one of his sons, He was his character was a little more interesting because you got the impression that he was someone always trying to win his father's approval. He's the first to laugh at his father's jokes. He's the first to join in at any little skit that his father's gonna put on to break up the tension. And so that I can understand. That that's a classic case of a child who is neglected, who's will do anything for a parent's approval. But Jean was certainly smarter and more mature, and so I can understand her feeling for her father and feeling bad for him and wanting to help. But there wasn't enough of how this her upbringing has affected her. I mean, here she was with all of them, and you have a mother who died when you're young, and a father who's doesn't really know how to be a father, clearly. And so there wasn't really any room for that, which was a shame because I think that would have enriched her part. But overall, I mean, it's still a film that I think is really, 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 really incredible. The actor who played Phoebe Rice, Brenda D. Banzie, she was phenomenal because she's just sort of suddenly begins to drink and blows up on Archie. And it's a really nasty scene because he calls her pathetic and all sorts of terrible names. But he goes right back to break the tension by, playing a song or he's up front with some kind of a joke. But she begins to drink not just because of the fact that they're facing bankruptcy and they have he can't even write a check. She has to write checks with her name because he's so broke. But she was drinking. My impression was that she was drinking not just because of the debt, but also because of this marriage that is not going well. And, that has not been going well for a while because he's just in his own world, Archie. You also have Billy Rice, the father, and I mean he's quite humorous in it. I mean, off the top, he's complaining about both Phoebe and Archie and to Jean, and it was quite humorous. And later on, he's the one who goes and tells Tina that Archie's having an affair with that Archie's married. So then once there goes the plan to marry Tina and get her family's money in order to fund the new show. So that plan, boom, goes out the window. But he has this, once he goes to Archie and says, well, I had to tell her. I mean, come on, what are you doing? And then he finds out that Archie was trying to get money from her family for a show, which he did not know. And he tries to, what I liked about it, it wasn't as though everything at home was so nasty and that everyone was at each other's throats. The other film that John Osborne wrote that Tony Richardson also directed, which I do really like, Look Back in Anger, is more like that. It has more of like it's just really nasty, really angry. And this is different because that's certainly there, but there is more feel. There's more feel for each other. I mean, the father really tries to tell Archie he did not mean to ruin his plans for a new show. I mean, just the way in which, I'm not too familiar with Roger Livesey, or is it Livesey? Roger Livesey or Livesey, who played Billy Rice. I'm not too familiar with him, but I thought he was wonderful. Just the way he appealed to his son. He didn't say I'm sorry directly, but he's like, I didn't know. Like I really didn't know. And so his plan is to, come out of retirement and put on a show together because he's still publicly well liked, which was quite telling that Archie wasn't. It's not that he wasn't before because he was well known, but people are losing interest in him. And there's an interesting scene at a certain point where his father's at a bar and people, toast him and tell him to sing a song, and everyone crowds around him as he sings a song, and they cut to Archie singing on stage, and it's shot from a distance, and he's all alone on this stage, this big wide stage with not many people watching, and the people who are there are not really enjoying it either. And it's just quite telling. I like how they did that visually to show that his father was clearly still admired by the audiences, and people are really losing interest in Archie. So that was done visually, just the way everyone was blocked, and the way everyone was acting, and just the mise en scene in general was wonderfully done. But his idea is, of course, to, well, I'll come out of retirement and we'll do a show together. And towards the end, right before he goes on, because he's quite elderly, and he has a stroke, or it's a heart attack, or one or the other, and he dies backstage, dies on literally nearly on the stage. It's a show, I guess everyone in show business wants, if you could choose where to die, it would at least be on the stage or on a film set or something along those lines. On top of that, Archie also finds out that his son died over at the war. So it is who Alan Bates plays. Albert Finney plays Mick Rice. So it is rather melodramatic, certainly, but the director Tony Richardson was also utilizing a real cinema verite style, very much like you saw in the Italian neorealism, where you're shooting on location, natural light, everything about it. They wanted it to be down to the location, down to the sound, down to the light. And so it certainly has the documentary feel to it, just like the Italian neorealism films, and so do all the other British New Wave films. So it certainly feels, everything feels so real, but it does have this melodramatic, heightened feel to the writing, and to the things happening to it as well, because there certainly are, from a structural standpoint, we have like high stakes, we have major problems, we have major events happening like death, and so it is a very melodramatic plot, but its materials are certainly rooted in a great deal of feelings, and in a great deal of truth of the people being depicted. Another wonderful scene with Archie is with his daughter, as they look after a performance, as they look out into the empty theater, and he talks about how, this is a great scene, and Olivier played it beautifully. He talks about how that the behind his eyes is nothing but death. That everything he's doing is purely technique, and that after a while, that's what a performer knows how to do with a smile, and can get things out of an audience to show off his technique. And he talks about going to Canada at one point, and seeing this wonderful performance from these church-going people somewhere, and he didn't even know what they were talking about in the song, if it was Jesus or something. But he saw this woman that was singing just a hope, and the love and hope and humanity that she had was so, for him, he didn't say this directly, but he was clearly moved by what he saw, and it was so truthful, and that he said that was something he could never do. And what was interesting about that was that it's interesting that Olivier asked for this part to be written, and I can't help but wonder. And what I'm saying here may be slightly controversial, but there was always this element of British actors at this point being criticized by the American actors for not approaching things truthfully or realistically in their acting. I mean, and Olivier was very good at with technique, with voice, with movement. He could transform himself into so many different kinds of characters, and the transformation, I mean, people who have talked about seeing him on stage, was remarkable. But what was going on inside emotionally, the British tradition was to usually just to make those things look real, to do it naturally, and to make it look real, but not to actually have the emotion. I can't help but wonder if John Osborne was using that part of Olivier for the character of Archie, talking about the fact, I mean, he's certainly not a third-rate performer, Olivier, like Archie Rice was. I mean, he was a god for most of his career in London. I can't help but wonder if John Osborne saw something there about the fact that Olivier didn't really approach things truthfully, and use that in the character of Archie, because Archie says, I could never do that. And Olivier also was someone who always controlled everything. And I'm no expert on Olivier's, film work. Of course, naturally, I've never seen him on stage because he died in '89, uh, and I was born in '87, so I never saw him on stage. I've seen some of his films. And one thing I certainly noticed from this film forward is that his performances became much more realistic. You look at him in Marathon Man, he's incredible. And if you look at his performances before The Entertainer, Rebecca, he's really good in to an extent, but every time he does something that where he had to be like, let's say, angry, for example, he fakes it. And I don't see him faking anything in this film. I mean, everything he does is so truthful, so realistic. He's a man on the brink of, of nervous breakdown. I mean, every time he's also on the verge of emotion sometimes that is really powerful, and he's hiding all of his sadness and as well by putting on this, song and dance routine. He even, at one point early in the film, is talking with his daughter, and I love that you can hear the clock ticking. It was almost like time's running out for Archie. Not necessarily in his life, but in his career, which perhaps for him is pretty much the same thing. His career is his life. So in a way, time is running out for him. And at that point, he's been carrying on with jokes, and then he says he stops and he just looks down and he looks away and he looks like he was about to cry. I mean, it's really moving. I mean, it's certainly one of the great performances he gave on film. Again, that's just a theory. I could be totally wrong. I'm not saying this is the case because he was a god for many, many years. And it wasn't really until the 60s later on that in England they got more interested in realistic, truthful acting. Up until that point, they were, even though they had their share of like Richard Burton, for example, who was very, very realistic. They certainly had actors like that, but generally speaking, and it wasn't really until the 60s that they actors became more interested in the truthful, realistic acting that was happening in the States. And I lived in London for a year and a half, so I know that even nowadays that approach is still quite common. Is to be sort of presentational in their style in the theater anyways. So that was just something, a theory I have, and I Googled it. I couldn't find anything about Tony Richardson saying anything about that. So who knows? I'm just putting it out there as a thought. Another thing that Olivier as Archie, which was just really appealing to me is that it often, which was really realistic, is often in films and plays, and this is not a criticism, it works beautifully when it's done well, is characters changing for the better. Normally, sometimes for the worse, but normally for the better, that they learn something, there's some kind of growth. And his character really doesn't learn anything. And really what happens is that he's forced out of show business. Is that, his idea for the play goes to hell, not once but twice. First with, Tina finding out that he's married, and then his father dying. So that goes out the window both times. But then his wife gets an offer from her brother to move to Canada. Because they has a successful hotel business in Toronto, and they were going to open up a new one in Ottawa, and they want them to run it. And so he doesn't want to do this. I mean, again, he's a showbiz guy. He doesn't want to go run some hotel in Ottawa, but his wife wants to go. And at this point, he has no choice. I mean, right after right after he buries his father, his brother-in-law says, hey, you gotta move to Ottawa. You're doing this. I mean, he was obviously also worried about Phoebe and the way in which they were living. And so he has no choice. And he says to his brother-in-law, well, I still got 2 more shows. And as right at the end of the film, it's really sad. I mean, it's, for a guy who is very a flawed, selfish character, And as he even said earlier, when again this beautiful scene with Tina, he says to her right after they sleep together, he says, "Well, my wife couldn't stand that that I didn't take life seriously, or she saw him that way." And I think he believed that. I mean, he had enough introspection to know his flaws, but he still could not help but be who he was. And right at the end, he has these last two performances, and it's darkly funny at the same time because they literally have to drag him off the stage. And he's telling the audience that there's going to be more shows, and the producer in the wings is like, what is he telling everybody that for? This is it. This is over. And it's just him after the show ends. It's that empty theater. Him and his daughter look out, and that's it, and they walk off. But it's not as if he realized that these music hall shows aren't popular anymore, that they're going out. I'm sure he was aware of that. It's not as if he thought, well, I have to now do something else, that things are changing. It's that he was forced out, that he had no choice. And that is often what happens with people. And as an actor myself, I mean, I know a lot of people who have quit, and sometimes they quit because they have to quit. Sometimes they do quit because they want to quit. But in Archie's case, he quit because he had to quit. His bills were such that he had to start a new life, and he had to do something else. And at this point, it was either go to jail, because he also hadn't paid income tax in like 25 years, which again he's making fun of off the top. He says he's celebrating the fact that he hasn't paid income tax backstage, but he's forced out. And it was also telling that Albert Finney, he's only in one scene, Albert Finney, before he goes off to war, and he says to his brother and his sister, before he goes, he says, well, what can you do? You got to take things as they come. And it's interesting that his son was very wise enough to learn that lesson, which is a very hard lesson. I mean, change is very, very difficult. I find change very, very difficult. A lot of people find change very, very difficult. And I don't blame Archie for finding this change to be very difficult and to be almost something impossible for him. But it was interesting that Mick would say, you got to take things as they come. And it was to see the younger man wiser in that sense. So it's a wonderful film. I absolutely love it. Despite some of its flaws that I mentioned with the children, I felt that they were underdeveloped, but the acting is superb from everyone. It's got wonderful performances. It's a powerful story about change and how hard it is to change. And I absolutely love it. So if you haven't seen it, you can watch this on the Criterion channel, and I highly, highly recommend it. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of my YouTube channel and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found. Go to youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I also want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here on my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.